Imagine this: a lavish feast is in full swing. Golden goblets overflow with wine, and laughter echoes through the grand halls of Babylon. King Belshazzar, drunk with arrogance, raises a sacred goblet stolen from God's temple and mocks the God of Israel. Suddenly, the room falls silent. All eyes freeze on the wall. A disembodied hand appears, its glowing fingers etching mysterious words into the plaster. The king's face drains of color. His knees buckle as he stares in terror at the words, MENE, MENE, TEKEL, URPHARSIN. What do these 4 words mean? Why did they strike fear into the heart of the most powerful king on earth? And how did they foretell the end of one of history's greatest empires? Stay tuned as we unravel the chilling story of a divine message that changed the course of history in one fateful night. The night was one of unparalleled splendor. Babylon, the crown jewel of ancient empires, stood as a fortress of wealth, power, and excess. Inside the grand palace, King Belshazzar hosted a feast for his nobles, their laughter and revelry a stark contrast to the tensions brewing outside the city walls. The Persian army, led by the cunning Cyrus, camped nearby, but Babylon's walls were legendary, impenetrable. Belshazzar was confident in the city's defenses and his own invincibility. To prove it, he decided to mock the God of Israel by calling for the sacred vessels from the temple in Jerusalem, spoils taken by his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. As golden goblets were filled with wine, Belshazzar toasted his idols, gods of gold, silver, wood, and stone. He laughed, a deep, mocking sound, as though daring the God of Israel to respond. But then it happened. A strange, supernatural silence blanketed the room. The music stopped, the laughter died, and every head turned toward the far wall. Out of nowhere, a disembodied hand appeared, glowing faintly in the dimly lit banquet hall. The hand moved with purpose, its fingers carving words into the plaster as though the wall were soft clay. Gasps and screams erupted. Even the boldest nobles recoiled in fear. Belshazzar, the mighty king of Babylon, was reduced to a trembling, pale figure. His knees knocked together, and his strength abandoned him. The words glowed on the wall. No one could understand the words. The language was unfamiliar, the message inscrutable. Belshazzar shouted for his wise men, astrologers, and magicians. They rushed in, their robes trailing behind them, but none of them could decipher the message. The king's desperation grew with every passing moment. He offered riches and power to anyone who could interpret the writing. Whoever explains this will wear a purple robe, a gold chain, and rule as third in my kingdom. But the wise men shook their heads, their faces blank with fear and confusion. Then the Queen Mother entered the hall. She walked with grace and authority, her voice steady despite the chaos. Do not be alarmed, O king. There is a man in your kingdom with the spirit of the holy gods. He interpreted dreams and riddles for your father, Nebuchadnezzar. Call for Daniel. Daniel was no stranger to Babylon's royal courts. Once a young exile from Judah, he had risen to prominence under Nebuchadnezzar for his ability to interpret dreams and mysteries. Now, as an older man, he was summoned once more to speak truth to power. When Daniel entered, Belshazzar's arrogance flickered briefly, but fear quickly reclaimed him. If you can read these words and explain them, I'll give you wealth and power, the king promised. Daniel's response was blunt. Keep your gifts for yourself. Give your rewards to someone else. But I will read the writing for you, O king, and tell you what it means. Daniel's words cut like a blade. He reminded Belshazzar of his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar, a man who had been humbled by God despite his great power. Nebuchadnezzar had learned to honor the Most High. Belshazzar, on the other hand, had not. You have defied the Lord of Heaven, Daniel declared, his voice steady and unwavering. You used the vessels from his temple to praise gods of silver and gold, but the God who holds your breath in his hands you have not honored. Therefore, he has sent this message to you. Daniel pointed to the glowing words on the wall. MENE, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. TEKEL, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. URPHARSIN, Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The hall erupted in chaos. Belshazzar was frozen, his face a mask of horror. But true to his word, he ordered Daniel to be robed in purple and adorned with gold, declaring him third ruler of the kingdom. It was a hollow gesture. That very night, the prophecy was fulfilled. While Belshazzar feasted in arrogance, the Persians had been working in silence and strategy. They diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed under Babylon's walls, creating a dry path for their army. In the dead of night, the Persians entered the city undetected. Before dawn, Babylon fell. King Belshazzar was slain, and the mighty empire was handed over to the Medes and Persians, as the words on the wall had foretold. The story of the writing on the wall is more than a historical account, it's a warning. It reminds us of the dangers of pride and the inevitable consequences of defying God. Belshazzar believed his walls were impenetrable, his power unshakable, but he forgot the one who rules over all. The same God who weighed Babylon's fate weighs our lives today. Are we found wanting, or are we living in reverence to him? Pride is a silent destroyer, capable of crumbling the strongest empires and the most secure hearts. Belshazzar's downfall began not with the Persian army but with his arrogance. He mocked the sacred vessels of God, believing his power was untouchable. This pride blinded him to the imminent danger surrounding his kingdom. Pride often leads us to overestimate our abilities while underestimating God's sovereignty. It tempts us to place our confidence in temporary things, wealth, power, achievements, rather than in the eternal. Belshazzar's story reminds us that no matter how fortified our walls may seem, they are never impenetrable when God intervenes. In our own lives, pride can manifest in subtle ways, refusing to admit mistakes, seeking validation through accomplishments, or neglecting gratitude. Like Belshazzar, we may not see the warning signs until it's too late. The Bible consistently warns against pride. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall, Proverbs 16 verse 18. God humbles the proud and exalts the humble. The challenge is to cultivate humility by recognizing God's hand in our successes and submitting to his authority in every aspect of life. Belshazzar's arrogance serves as a stark reminder that unchecked pride leads to judgment. If we are to avoid his fate, we must examine our hearts regularly and ask, where have I allowed pride to take root? Are there areas where I need to surrender my self-reliance to God's sovereignty? By doing so, we can walk in humility and align ourselves with God's purpose. Belshazzar's use of the sacred vessels was not just an act of irreverence, it was a misuse of something entrusted to him. Those vessels, once dedicated to the worship of God, represented holiness and devotion. By using them for his selfish, idolatrous feast, Belshazzar showed a blatant disregard for the responsibility he carried as a ruler. This lesson speaks to the accountability of stewardship. What God entrusts to us, our time, talents, resources, and influence, is sacred. When we misuse or neglect these gifts, we fail in our divine responsibility. Belshazzar's story reminds us that stewardship isn't just about managing what we have, it's about honoring the one who gave it to us. In our lives, we might ask, how are we stewarding the resources God has entrusted to us? Are we using our time to glorify him? Are our talents being invested in ways that align with his purposes? Stewardship goes beyond personal benefit, it's about advancing God's kingdom and bringing him glory. Jesus' parable of the talents, Matthew 25 verses 14 to 30, underscores this principle. Those who faithfully stewarded their resources were rewarded, while the one who hid his talent faced severe consequences. Similarly, Belshazzar's misuse of God's sacred vessels resulted in judgment and the loss of his kingdom. Stewardship is not optional for believers, it's a divine mandate. Let Belshazzar's story inspire us to reflect on our own responsibilities. May we handle what God has given us with reverence and purpose, ensuring that when he examines our lives, he finds us faithful stewards of his blessings. The story of Belshazzar's feast and the writing on the wall is a powerful demonstration of God's sovereignty. Despite Babylon's might and the king's arrogance, God's plan unfolded precisely as he intended. The fall of Babylon was not a surprise to God, it was a fulfillment of his will, prophesied years earlier through Isaiah and Jeremiah. God's sovereignty means he rules over all creation, from the rise and fall of empires to the smallest details of our lives. Belshazzar believed his kingdom was secure, but his fate was sealed the moment he defied God. This teaches us that no human power, no matter how great, can stand against God's authority. In our lives, we often face situations where God's sovereignty feels distant or unclear. When we see injustice prosper or feel overwhelmed by life's challenges, we may wonder if God is truly in control. But stories like this remind us that God's timing and justice are perfect, even when they are beyond our understanding. Daniel's faith in God's sovereignty allowed him to stand boldly before Belshazzar, speaking truth without fear. Likewise, we are called to trust in God's control, even when the world seems chaotic. His plans are always higher than ours, and his justice will prevail. Belshazzar's story also encourages us to reflect: are we living in submission to God's sovereignty, or are we trying to control our own lives? Recognizing his authority requires surrender, trust, and obedience. Let this story be a reminder that God is actively working in our lives, orchestrating events for his glory and our ultimate good. The story of the writing on the wall is more than a historical account, it's a mirror reflecting timeless truths. It reminds us of the consequences of pride, the sacredness of stewardship, and the undeniable sovereignty of God. Just as Belshazzar's feast ended in judgment, so too are our lives weighed on the scales of eternity. At Scriptures in Pictures TV, we bring these powerful biblical moments to life, not just to entertain but to inspire and challenge. As we reflect on Belshazzar's story, let us ask ourselves: are we honoring God with what he has entrusted to us? Are we living humbly, recognizing his authority over our lives? Remember, God's handwriting may not appear on a wall today, but his message is written all around us, in his word, in our circumstances, and in the whispers of his spirit. Are we paying attention? Thank you for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Scriptures in Pictures TV for more captivating stories that connect God's word to our everyday lives. Until next time, let's live with purpose, humility, and faith, knowing that our lives are in the hands of a sovereign God.